Welcome to another episode of Better You. I'm your host Dre, and this week I decided to address something that I've been seeing in these internet streets a lot as of recently. Frankly, there's a lot of non-black minorities that speak about black folks in straight up crazy ways, and frankly are truly ignorant to the fact that there's been a lot of advances and things that black folks have fought for that they benefit off of. And I'm just going to touch on three big key aspects. The first thing I want to tackle, though, is this false notion of collective trauma bonding. I fucking hate that shit. When black folks talk about what they've been through in this country, it is not trauma bonding. It is simply us recounting our experiences. And for somebody who is not from our community to come in and tell us how we ought to comport ourselves, how we ought to deal with the challenges that we uniquely face, frankly, you can go eat a dick and shove it. That is one thing that I've never done to anybody of another community. And frankly, I'm not gonna stand for anybody that's not from our community trying to do it to us. So if you wanna come and you wanna speak on a black issue, if you wanna offer 2 cents in a constructive manner, okay. There's some forums where people will most definitely invite you to come up and speak and have those discussions. And I don't think it's not constructive to see what you can glean and gain from how other folks live, how other folks do. But as a collective, though, and this goes for anybody who has not a shred of respect and buys into that trauma bonding and all that other racist bullshit about black folks, like I said before, you don't even know that the very things that you brag about being able to do was enabled by black folks. The quote unquote, just go get your bag, what are you fighting? Just live your life, get your house, be happy. Like, you have no fucking clue. So I'm gonna try to do this in 15 minutes or less. There are 3 big things I'm gonna talk about, and if I can find a couple sources, I know I definitely can find some sources, but I'll leave links down in the descriptions that kind of go more in depth, because each of these things, there's a whole lot to it. And frankly, you're not gonna get the full scope and gravity of everything from some dude on YouTube in 15 minutes. The first thing that I often hear these very same people that accuse black folks of trauma bonding talk about is the neighborhood and home that they live in. And I think that's really funny, because in the 50s, there was a Supreme Court case that not a lot of people talk about. To me, I think it's every bit as important as a lot of others, one of which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But it is J.D. Shelly versus Kraemer. You see, back in the day, there were things called redlining that restricted black folks to particular neighborhoods. Honestly, any people of color, to particular neighborhoods. Often these places were zoned to include vices within them. So think liquor store, gun store, strip clubs, brothels, those types of places, as well as industry that would be polluting. Honestly, in the South, you can kind of see this still to this day. A lot of southern towns were mill towns. And if you look at where the mills are, they often are near or in the heart of some black neighborhoods in those particular towns. So that's the context. So on top of that, there were these things called restrictive covenants. And essentially what a restrictive covenant was, it was a group of folks that came together in a particular neighborhood that said, hey, we're going to come together and make an agreement that we're never going to sell these homes or allow anybody who is not white to purchase a home within this neighborhood. So in order to enforce these covenants and make sure they're maintained, essentially that's where you get the birth of the homeowners associations from in this country. But that's the basic premise. It's a little bit more to it, but high level overview. What happened in the case of J.D. Shelly was he found somebody outside of St. Louis, in a St. Louis suburb, that was willing to sell their house. He had no trouble paying. The person had no trouble selling to him, but this home was bound by one of these restrictive covenants. As a result, essentially, they tried to dispossess him of the home and say that the sale was invalid because of the covenant. It bounced around in the federal court system and got all the way to the Supreme Court. Essentially, the Supreme Court ruled that while it is legal to make an agreement in such terms, it isn't enforceable. So essentially, that case ended, or at least put on the books, the pretense of housing discrimination in such a manner being illegal. The next one, because if you're in that neighborhood, you probably have to have a job to sustain that nice home in that neighborhood. So a lot of people think that, the way it is today kind of sort of always been, more or less. Like you just go get a job and whatnot. And this is kind of goes to where it feeds into the reparations argument. Because even if you were a person of color, or even if you were a black man and able to get a job, and say you and this white guy had the same job, you weren't going to be paid the same. I could almost guarantee that 99% of the time you were not going to be paid the same. So it was legal to discriminate on basis of race, sex, and various others up until the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So essentially, in a nutshell, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 ended discrimination in employment on those bases of race, gender, sex, so on and so forth. So that, along with several other pieces of key legislation, such as the Equal Pay Act and so on and so forth, meant that men, minority men, women, at least in theory, we should all be paid the same for the same job. So without that legislation, it would be perfectly legal for a job to say you can't work here, for a corporation to say you can't work here because you're black. Or if they do allow you to work here, it would be perfectly legal for them to put you in different working conditions, i.e., I'm going to give you inferior tools, and I'm going to give this person more adequate tools for the job that I'm asking them to do. I'm also probably, if I feel like it, I can pay you less. So, getting the picture now? So, that is two big key ways in which Black contributions have shaped the lives of all minorities in this country. But if we're thinking about the ideal life, I already addressed that big house and that nice job that you have to pay for that big house. But most people kind of want to have some kids or have kids. And of course, school. And this is the one that I was alluding to earlier, which I was saying I think Kraemer versus Shelly should be just as big a deal. But of course, Brown versus Board of Education. For those who don't know, Brown versus Board of Education, essentially desegregated schools. Before that, you had the concept of separate but equal, in which in the South, you would have separate facilities. In education, this often meant black school, white school. In businesses, it meant essentially, there would be a black section where either would serve blacks out the back, so on and so forth. So with Brown versus Board of Education, the act of desegregating schools meant that blacks, any non-white people were now integrated into these school systems, which would, in theory, get them access to greater resources and put them on more equal footing with their white counterparts. And this is one that kind of hits home for me. I make no bones about it. Like I live in Augusta now, but I grew up in the deep South, in the low country of South Carolina, a little town called Farmville. And in that town, there's a school. It's the middle school now, but it used to be the black high school. It was North District. And as we matriculated through the school system, we went to North District, and then we went to Wade Hampton, which was named after the Civil War General Wade Hampton, and that was the white high school. And one of the things that really stuck out, especially making that transition, but even more so once I went to college and traveled and got out a little bit, was just how lacking we were. And while there have been some minor updates and things, that school mostly was in the condition that my father, my aunts, uncles that matriculated through it was in. And I get it. I get it much more so than some. When it would rain, there were some rooms that had leaks. There was not central AC. Every classroom had like the window units. A lot of our materials were old. One of the books I had my pop's name in it. I'm not sure if textbooks are still used today, but to kind of give you the picture, you would have a book. There would be a blank page where you could put your name, and it probably had like 15, 20 spots, and there'd be a blank page over here before you got to the actual book. And my pop's name was one of the first names on that blank page, and that book had been matriculated for so long that names have gone down that page, and people just started writing on the back. And that's the type of conditions. Granted, the conditions I came up in was way better, and that's crazy to think, even for what they had. But hand-me-down materials, out of date, facilities with several issues, and that legacy even kind of continues today. You could argue similar things can be seen in the conditions of facilities of some HBCUs, which is why it's important for us to support them, whether you even attend it or not. I do believe in investing in our own. Even in terms of athletics, I thought my aunt was telling like one of those old people stories one time when she told me about the court they played on. The court they played on was in the playground of that middle school. They played on a dirt court. And this was not like, hey, playground pickup game. This was the school team. And it completely blew my mind. I ended up talking subject came up one day at my father's side of the family at a cookout, and it was like, oh yeah, we played on dirt courts. Yeah, we'd get somebody, they plow the lines into the court before the game started, and it just blew my freaking mind. So, in conclusion, without Shelly V. Kraemer, that house and neighborhood that you live in, that you're so damn proud of because you aren't around black folks and you aren't like black folks and so on and so forth, you wouldn't be able to live there. Without the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that job you have, either you wouldn't have it or you'd be getting paid. It would be legal for them to discriminate in your pay and pay you less than your peers for doing the same damn job. And without Brown versus Board of Education, your kids would be in schools that are woefully underfunded, dilapidated, and facing serious challenges. And those are just 3 tangible, immediate ways in which the contributions of black folks have improved and shaped this country for everyone. And let me be perfectly clear. This is not aimed at all non-black folks. I feel like there are a lot of folks that do get it, but there's a loud bunch that don't. And to that loud bunch that don't, sit down, shut the fuck up, and open a goddamn book and learn something before you start talking. Because going back to the original point, black folks, we have an experience in which a lot of the things that, frankly, even myself, we take for granted today, and we still have a lot of fighting to do to fully be equal and fully on par. So when you hear people talking about their experiences, talking about the things that they went through, it is just that. It is their experiences. It is not for you to come in, to ride them, poo them, try to say that it is some moral failing, some lack of effort. Nah, it's not any of that. The fact of the matter is, we always been fighters. The fact of the matter is, everything we got, we had to fight for. And everything we fight for